When I was a kid, the Ninja Turtles and some others, like Three Ninjas, inspired me to take martial arts. And I got fairly good at it. I ranked up and I was a black belt. And one day I learned a little bit more about what pain was about when I went to a competition. It was in a tournament, and it was the board breaking section of this tournament, and I had several different techniques I was going to do, and there was one I was going to finish with, which was going to be like the showstopper. It was a move probably nobody else was doing. It was called a speed break. Now, a speed break is different than all the other kind of breaks people are doing. All the other breaks involve force and brute strength kind of techniques, so you had to still hit the right spot on the board, but that was what you needed. Well, the speed break was one where this board was kind of held just at the bottom. It's kind of sticking up in the air. The breeze could blow it a little bit, and you had to move so fast that your strike would go through the board before the force of what you hit it with pushed it out of the way. It was a pretty tricky move to do. And so I lined up to do that, and as I was getting set up, I realized that they didn't have any boards cut to the size I needed to do this technique. So they had only the bigger ones, like I was a probably 12 at the time, and they had the boards that were like for the adults that were left, not for the kids that were my age. And so I was trying to decide what to do, and I went ahead and said, you know what, I'm still going to do this. I think I can pull this off still. And so I got up and I lined up and I went and I did the strike, and I heard this loud crack, and I was convinced that I had done the technique. The board had shattered, and I went to go bow, and when I heard all these oohs, and not the good kind of oohs, but the oohs like that was not good, I looked back and the board was still in one piece. My hand was a little sore. So I did what I thought I was supposed to do, and I lined up and I did it again, and I went and I did the strike again, and I hit that board, and again a loud cracking sound, and nothing happened to the board. Instead, my thumb right here on this joint was cracked. It is the first and only time so far in my life that I have broken a bone, and I broke it pretty good right there. Broken in such a way that I ended up having to have a cast from basically my elbow all the way up to the tip of my thumb. So I was walking around giving thumbs up or thumbs down all the time. And I'll tell you this, it hurt. And the hurt grew and grew and grew all throughout that day. And ice wasn't cutting it, and Advil wasn't cutting it, and something needed to happen to help me relieve that pain. And it was also bad because this was the kind of pain that you could avoid, right? Like I could have changed the move to something else. I could have not done that station. My choices led to the pain that I was feeling. This last month, we talked a lot about forgiveness and how the things that happen to us cause things like bitterness and trauma in our lives. And what do we do to heal from the pain that's already happened when we've already been hurt? But there are ways that God calls us to live. You can almost call them like a rule of life that God gives us in order to help us live in ways that avoid some of that pain that we feel. We'll never be free from pain. We'll never be free from things that cause us harm. But there are some things that we can do to avoid unnecessary stuff and to handle the hurt that comes a little bit better. And if we can weave these kind of rules into the ways that we live, then we can grow and mature. And the one I want to start talking about today is kind of a big deal. Have you ever noticed that the hardest part about being a human being is often the other human beings that are around us? We are created in such a way that we can't deal without other people. We are communal beings, and yet, man, they can be really, really hard to deal with, especially the ones that can be like judgy, right? You know how this happens. You walk around and you see people checking and looking, and man, they're judging you for how you look or what you wear, how your hair was cut, which is why, like, when I get up in the morning, my hair is crazy. I've got to make sure I get it wet every morning because I don't want people to see and judge what I look like when I look like a wild animal was making a nest in my head every single morning. We see people judge us for what we like or what we don't like because this was cool to like, but this thing, why would you ever like that. I can't talk about that. We see people judging about who you hang out with and who you don't hang out with. And I even experienced this in the credentialing process for my ordination. I have to, at the time, I was interviewing every year. That's the process. You come before a board, you meet with them, they investigate, we say interrogate sometimes, but it's usually nicer than that, and then they make their recommendations on where you should go, what you need to work on, those sorts of things. And as I was going through the process, I thought it went really well that year. I was working in maintenance, and the building that I was working in is where the interviews were going to be held. And so to help them with the scheduling, because it was becoming an issue, I said, hey, instead of waiting for something later or earlier, if you have a time in the middle of the day, I'll just take a little bit of time off work. I'll come in. I'll do my interview then. And so I showed up. I did my best to clean up my face. I didn't completely change clothes, but I took off my work shirt and I put on a nicer shirt, and I got the dirt and stuff off my face because we were painting and cleaning out underneath some bathrooms that day, so it wasn't the best stuff. Changed my shoes out of my work boots. I sprayed something on so I'd smell a little better, and I went and I had my interview. And I thought the interview went great. Didn't really struggle with the questions, so we had a good conversation. I was grateful for the prayers they had after me. And I went on my way thinking everything was fine. I got a call from my pastor 2 days later, though, that I needed to come in and meet with him. You see, the group that I had met with that didn't know about the conversation I'd had when I scheduled the interview saw me coming in and not wearing a suit and tie, not with a sport coat on, and they thought I wasn't taking things seriously. They thought I just rolled in, and they were judging me based on my appearance that day without catching up on all of the details. And I knew what it was like to be judged. And you know what's even crazier about all those people that do all that kind of judging? Is that you and I have people and maybe specific times in our mind where that's happened to us, and we're being judgy about them. It's just easy for us to do that, to compare, to judge, to put ourselves in a rank order where we end up above somebody else. And our attitude towards other people is a big deal. It's a key to avoiding some of the pain that we're going to experience in life, because our attitudes lead to our actions. My attitude of thinking I can still do it, I'm good enough, I'm better than I really am, broke my thumb. And when it applies to how we treat other people and how they treat us, judging others isn't going to cut it. There has to be another way of approaching and dealing with each other. Jesus speaks about this during the Sermon on the Mount. The context of this sermon is he is starting his ministry. He's near the beginning. He's done some stuff that has drawn a crowd, a big crowd, out to the countryside to hear him. And who is in that crowd is important. Because on the side of this hill, the vast majority in the area that he's at are the working poor, the needy, the discouraged. These are people that are used to scarcity, of having to struggle to have enough. These are people that are used to being judged by some of the other people that are in the crowd. The Pharisees and the tax collectors and the educated and the wealthy that employed them. But they were used to being judged as dumb, as poor. They were the rednecks of the day, and they were told over and over again that they were worthless. And then these people who were told all these things would respond in kind by judging those other people that were there, their bosses, the Pharisees, the rabbis, the others in the area. Those were the city slickers. Those were the stuck-up people. Those were the people that were oppressing them and putting them down. These were the elites. And so there was this whole lot of judging going back and forth, always looking at the other person and what they had going on and filling in gaps, whether they knew the context of that individual story or not. And to this group of people, after telling them not to worry and that their anxiety was not doing them any good, he says this to them. He says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And this is the point where the people who have this justice streak, who hate double standards, are starting to get pumped up. They're like, yes, not different measures for different people. We're going to do this together. And so how well would you stand up to the standards that you use for other people? Maybe you're someone you don't like when other people's late. Personally, I do not like to be late. And you can kind of see other people and you're waiting and you're checking your watch when they're supposed to meet you and they don't show up on time. And you're like, you've got judgments for them, right? And then you are late. Maybe your car broke down, there was an accident, something happened, and you're late. Do you really feel good when they say, ooh, back to you? Or you're at the store, and you see somebody who looks like they don't have a lot, and they drive up in a really fancy car, and you see their spending habits, and you start to judge them based on what you think they're doing with what they have, and you have to wonder for yourself if I'm judging you back. Is your 401k maxed out? Are you out of debt? You have more than you need? Are you giving generously? Are you tithing like you're supposed to? I can judge your spending habits too, right? But if I use a different standard, then you can look better when you're judging than somebody else. And Jesus said, you can't do that. The standard that you use is the standard that's going to be used against you, which means most of us are going to fail when we are judged by those standards, because we like to judge ourselves by our motives. We can fill in the gaps. We know all of the context. And we judge other people by their actions or the results of their actions. We know everything when we judge ourselves, and so we can be generous with how we judge. But when we see other people, we're judging out of ignorance, and will often come back and get us. Megan has a handicap pass because of her hips, and the way things work is she can oftentimes find days where she's going along fine, and then other days it's not so good, and some days she can walk a little bit, and other days she can walk more. So we have this handicap pass. We have it on our car and stuff, and you should see some of the looks we get sometimes when we use that handicap parking for her. Because we park, and instead of seeing someone with an amputee or someone that always has a wheelchair, because we don't always bring it with us, she gets out and starts to walk, judging out of ignorance. And when I judge other people in this way, it leads me to take actions against them that fit those judgments. What they usually reveal is that the people that I choose to judge are people that I see as beneath me. In fact, they might not even be people. They might just be things to be used, opportunities to take advantage of, ones where I can get what I need from you in this relationship, and then I can move on to the next one who's going to try and fulfill and satisfy me. Sometimes we see this in the way that waitstaff is treated in restaurants. They're not really human beings, and they're beneath you because they have to be the ones in the service industry, so they're there to serve you. They're servants. And so you treat them like it. They're not named. They're there to do your bidding all the time, in all ways. And if it's not done exactly how you like it, you have the right to raise your voice, to yell at them, to do all these things that you wouldn't do to another human being you thought was on equal footing as you. The last thing you're doing is treating this person as a person that Jesus loves. They're just a means to an end. You've judged them to be that. Jesus pushes this to a comical extreme with this whole plank and speck thinking. I mean, could you imagine you walk up and there's a guy who's got a little speck in his eye, you can barely see it, he's kind of, it's irritated, I've had a scratch on my eye, I know that stuff can be painful and irritated, but the guy walking up to tell you about it has got this 2x4 sticking out of his eye. I mean, just the balance that would be required and the neck strength to hold that thing up while he's walking around like this. Like, how is he even going to get over to your eye to be able to get that speck out? Because every time he tries to get close, that plank is going to get in the way. Jesus is like, look, you have got to get rid of that first before you can help somebody else, because what you're doing is being a hypocrite. Now, hypocrite literally means to wear a mask. It's how we say one thing and we do something else. If you have a double standard somewhere, that's where this hypocrite stuff comes in. It's where we judge other people by a different standard than ourselves, where we say one thing and we do something else, where we project who we are while hiding what's true inside of us. And Jesus has strong words for hypocrites throughout the scriptures. He calls them things like snakes and brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs and all these things we do not want to be described as. Why does he come down so hard on hypocrites? Because they lead themselves and others away from Jesus. When you're not living in reality, when there's not a consistency between the inner and outer life, between the words and the actions, you're not living in the real life that Jesus is calling you to and Jesus is offering you and Jesus inhabits. You're living in this other false reality that's not real and it won't stand up. And Jesus can't bless who you think you are. He only blesses who you really are. And so Jesus offers this instruction that instead of a double standard of judgment, don't worry about them at first until you have focused on yourself. We can be really good at pointing out the sins and problems in other people. I mean, that's kind of almost all of the 24-hour news channels now, right? For those of us in everyday conversation, a lot of times it sounds like this: I'm really concerned about Joe this week. Concern can become code for judgment. And we're usually concerned about people who are doing things that we don't necessarily struggle with, and so it's easy for us to project this is so bad onto them. There have been times when I know this has happened to me, and I hear other pastors tell the same sort of story. People will come and ask us to preach more about sin. We're not doing enough talking about sin. We need to be harder on it. We're being too lenient on what we're talking about, and this is the stuff that upsets God. And when I say, okay, great, what do you want me to preach on? They'll give me a list of things that they think we should be talking about, whether it's life or politics or addiction or lust or whatever it is. They'll give me a list of things. And I'll say, okay, which one of those are you struggling with? And they're like, well, it's not for me, Pastor. This is for other people. We need to talk about what they need to deal with. And I'm like, why would you want me to preach harder about something that you're not struggling with, instead of dealing with what is the one that you've got? When you're working on yourself and not so focused on them, you're able to grow and mature. And when you grow and mature in this way, it gives you compassion for other people, because suddenly you know what it's like to struggle with something. Like, I gave up every few years for Lent. I rotate through some things that I like to give up. It just helps me focus during that season. A few years ago was the last time I gave up Coke Zero and soda just in general for Lent. And it was hard. And there were some days where I was really jonesing for something. And it gives me a new founded appreciation for people who struggle with addictions of all kinds. Because I'm like, man, if this thing that's not really that hard is a daily struggle for me, how much more is it for those of you who are struggling with things like heroin and nicotine and these things that can just chemically bind you? When you're working on yourself and so busy judging other people, it gives you compassion for them. And it also gives you something to offer them. Not from above, like I'm better than you and I'm going to tell you what's wrong, but from beside them, because you're just a fellow person with them. One of my definitions I like about the gospel is one beggar telling another where to find bread. So it's not we're looking down on people, but it's we're there with you, and we think we may have found a path forward. A path to life, a path to freedom, a path to peace, a path to love. And you're not going to do that by judging somebody into it. You're going to do that by coming alongside them and finding where your common ground is. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. Well, Jesus takes this very seriously, and in fact, as he continues talking just a few verses later, he grounds this rule for living in God's character. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened for you. For everyone who seeks receives, he who seeks finds, and to whom knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. This is known as the golden rule. It is the rule of life that helps us mature. Do to others what you would have them do to you. But you can't do that on your own. It doesn't make sense unless you first understand the character of God, because the rule of life comes out of him. We can live a life where we are giving others the benefit of the doubt, where we are treating them how we would like to be treated, where we're not busy trying to judge what's wrong with them, because our God is so good to us. We have a God we can trust. We can trust that he loves us. We can trust he's for us. We can trust he hears us when we cry out to him. We can trust he will provide for us. Think about what that message would be like to a group of people who are used to scarcity and working poorness and feeling worthless. There is a God who gives good gifts to his children. So we don't need the other people to meet our needs for us. Jerry Maguire was lying. You complete me is not true with somebody else. They're not there to meet our needs in that way. God is the one who provides. And so if I don't need you to meet my needs, I'm not looking for what I can get out of you. It enables me to treat you like someone that I wish I was treated like. As valuable because of who I am, not just because of what I can do. As unique, to be treated with care. I mean, this rule of life, of treating others as you want to be treated, changes the questions we ask when we interact with people. It goes from what's in this for me to what can I do to help? Because the judgment becomes not if I'm better than you, but what can I contribute to you? Not what can I get from you, but what can I give you? There was a time when I had a coworker that was just all over the place during this season, and everything was last-minute requests and things coming in late, and it was getting really rough, and it was making it harder on everybody else who was working with them. And it didn't take long to realize that they were overwhelmed. And so we had a couple of choices. We could bring them in, and we can give them a come to Jesus talk and just tell them to get it together. I knew that with what was going on in my life, I didn't have the resources necessary to just come in and fix all the problems that were overwhelming them. So I couldn't even give them that. But what I did have, I gave to them, which was a cup of coffee and a kind word. And when they were expecting to have the hammer come down on them, and it didn't, they cried, and it was a good cry. Because it gave them the chance to take all the stuff that had been carried on them and to take it off. To be treated how I wish I would be treated in that case. This rule of life changes the questions. It changes from do they deserve it to how does Jesus see them? Because the person begging on the corner, that we like to say they did this to themselves, they need to go get a job, they're just going to waste the money on drugs. The question isn't that at all. Yes, I believe we should be wise with the ways we help people, but our opinion of whether they deserve it or not is not our concern. That's not our job. But out of reverence for Christ, I want to treat that person how I wish I would be treated if I found myself sitting there in their situation. Jesus' brother James writes, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this." I think this is how treating others as we want to be treated looks. It says, "Take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God requires." How big of a deal is this? Well, to Jesus, this rule of life sums up the law and the prophets. In other words, the whole Old Testament sums up in this. In fact, Jesus uses this phrasing when he talks about the great commandment to love the Lord your God with all that you are and love your neighbor as you love yourself. When we love others well, we will treat them as we want to be treated. And everything that God requires and asks of us and longs for us is wrapped up in that. So how have you been doing with it? If it hasn't been too good, that's all right. The Holy Spirit can enable us to grow and mature in this way of treating others how we wish to be treated, instead of with judgment or using them. In fact, might it be your challenge this week that with His help, there might be just one relationship that you could apply this to in the next 5 days and see how God can work through that. Father, I pray that you would give us eyes to see ourselves and others how you see us. And instead of judging, we would look at the things that you want to do in our own lives and give ourselves to them. That when the opportunity comes to help someone, it wouldn't be as someone looking down, but as someone coming alongside. Not even helping because we think that person deserves it, but because we want to treat them the way you have treated us. Help us to grow and mature in these things. And we pray this in your name.